Welcome to another episode of the Roots and Reflections podcast. I'm your host, Ibrahim, and I'm joined here with my guest, Alla Taher, to speak about concerning issues that our community has with the recent rise in mass deportations, immigration, and other issues that our community has that they can stay safe from. Alla, if you'd like to introduce yourself to our guest and give them a background to who you are, your history, your different experiences that you've had.
Thank you, Ibrahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Alla Taher. I'm an attorney. I spent 12 years at Homeland Security, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Worked as a trial attorney in El Paso, Texas, on the border, and then worked in Washington, D.C. in their headquarters, in their National Security and Terrorism Division, and then came to Chicago, where I was the Deputy Chief Counsel, so the number 2 attorney in Chicago, in a 5-state region, so it covered several of the neighboring states around Illinois, and advised, led a team of trial attorneys, went to court, in immigration court, Board of Immigration Appeals, also advised Homeland Security special agents and on criminal matters, on denaturalization matters, border issues. So it's an honor to be here. Worked under 3 administrations, from Barack Obama to President Trump, Donald Trump, to Joe Biden. So it's an honor to be here, and looking forward to speaking to everybody.
So you have a lot of background on what's going on with immigration and deportations. Can you give us a insight as to what is exactly going on? Because we see headlines all the time, people fearing deportation, people fearing immigration, their statuses and things like that. So what exactly is going on for our community to know?
So in a lot of ways, what's going on now is not that different than what was going on in the previous administration. The laws are still the same. Immigration, there has not been any major immigration reform to the Immigration Nationality Act since 1996. It's the same law. But what is different and what is concerning is that the government is enforcing the law. They're increasing more efforts significantly to enforce the law. So I think what we could expect is more immigration operations to arrest people, more arrests, more deportations, more ICE visits to a house or to a workplace or encounters in public. So that is happening. But when you hear the terms mass deportation, and they are talking about it, people in the government are talking about that. But is it realistic? And the answer is it's not. There's estimates that there's between 30 to 50 million people here in the United States without status.
Mm-hmm.
There's only so many officers. There's only so many agents. There's only so many judges and lawyers that can carry this out. Even if they start borrowing from other agencies, which is what they're talking about, there's only so many things they can do. So what I would expect is I think you're going to see a lot of the government going after people with crimes, which is what they've done in the past, people who are national security or terrorist concerns, human rights concerns, fraud. You're going to see them increasing the number of times they go out looking for these people to arrest them. That's really what you're going to see. And in that process, they're going to pick up anyone else who they encounter when they're going after that person. So that's how you get to the concern of, they're in this neighborhood and they're looking for this person, and then they arrested these 6 or 7 other people.
So when they arrest those people, what are those people doing that is causing them to be arrested when they're going out looking for a specific person who has a crime that they know that person committed? Why are these people getting arrested?
So ICE, or, if you take a step back broadly, the Department of Homeland Security, their mandate is to enforce the immigration laws. Mm-hmm. So if an individual is here in violation of the immigration laws, so they're here without any status, without lawful status to be here, ICE, under its legal authority, may arrest that person and deport them. Now, that person has a process. They get to make claims that they might have in front of an immigration court. They get to see an immigration judge most of the time. There are exceptions to that, but there's a legal process that goes along with it. But the short answer is, if you're here in violation of the law, ICE can arrest you. You don't have to have also committed a crime in order for ICE to be able to arrest you. You don't have to have those other things. The baseline is if you're here in violation of the law, ICE can arrest you.
So, okay. So let's say if there is a person who's here against in violation of the law, and they're in a household with people who are here legally, and ICE comes to the door of that person, and their legal, whether it be their brother, sister, mother, whoever the case is, comes to the door, and ICE is asking for this individual. They come into the house, or however the case is, but it just so happens that, because you see a lot of times there being what's called collateral arrests. So that's kind of what I want to understand. What are collateral arrests, and why are those people being arrested on the kind of, not on the back end, but in groups, kind of?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would argue that the government's collateral arrest policy is probably one of the biggest changes between Presidents Obama and Biden on the one hand versus President Trump on the other hand. Collateral arrests are, I hate to use this word, but it's collateral damage, essentially. It's I came looking for Alla, and I found Ibrahim with Alla. Now, the government can, ICE, just to clarify this, just to make sure we're all on a clear understanding, ICE cannot arrest someone that's here lawfully. They can't arrest U.S. citizens. They can't arrest someone with a green card unless there's a reason to take away the green card, like they committed a crime and they're deportable. But if you're here lawfully and you've done nothing wrong, they can't arrest you. There's no basis for it. When they talk about collateral arrests, they're talking about people who are also here in violation of immigration law. So if you come to the house and they're looking for Alla, they're looking for me, and my brother and sister are citizens, but I'm not, and my mom and dad are not, they can arrest me and my mom and dad if we're here in violation of immigration law, if we're here illegally under immigration law. If we're illegal, they have no basis to arrest us. They certainly can't arrest the citizens. Now, perhaps you're going to get to this in terms of the rights that folks have, so I'll wait to answer that. But the short answer is they cannot arrest citizens, and they cannot arrest you if you're here lawfully, and there's no issue. There's no reason for them to be able to say, you can be deported.
So going into the rights issue, now they can't arrest citizens, but can they work with local law enforcement, police, etc., to, let's say, if obstruction of justice, let's say if they're coming in to arrest somebody and there's altercation or whatever the case is, can they work with, or do they work with local law enforcement to arrest the citizens that are here for whatever they're doing to stop the arrest? Because you see a lot of videos, people trying to stop arrests or things like that. Like, so what is the?
So I'll say this cuts across not just ICE, but any law enforcement. Never, ever should you try to interfere with a law enforcement officer, even if what you think they're doing is wrong. Never try to harm them. Never threaten them. Those are red lines. Never do those. What you can do in those situations, if it's safe to do so and it doesn't, harm anyone, document that. Record it. Officers, they have trainings, and I could tell you, even within ICE, they have social media policies. Every time an officer goes out, they're in their mind, they should expect to be recorded. They should expect to be on camera, and they should behave accordingly. So if it's safe to do so, record it. Constitutional violations are fought in the courtroom. They're not fought on the streets. So that's number one. And I think I'm forgetting what you asked. If they come to the house, you can ask to see why they're there.
Yeah.
What is their authority to be there? That's the most important thing. Why are you here? Show me the authority that got you here. And what we're getting at is a warrant.
Yeah.
And it's very, very important. You're allowed to ask, can I see your badge? And can I see the warrant? And there's two types of warrants. There's a judicial warrant That's going to be something that'll have the name of a court. It could be a state court or federal court. And there is a administrative warrant. That's going to be something that'll have Department of Homeland Security at the top, and it'll be signed by an agent. 9 times out of 10, most of the time, the overwhelming majority of the time, they are going to show you an administrative warrant, the one signed by the agent. Why is this important? Because if they show you an administrative warrant, that allows them to go into public areas, but not private areas. The only way they can get into a private area if they show you an administrative warrant signed by an agent is if you allow them to. You consent. Judicial warrant, if they have a judicial warrant, that would give them the authority to enter a home or to go into the private area. So you want to ask that question, what is your authority for me? What is the warrant authority? And you want to inspect the warrant. Make sure if they show you a judicial warrant by chance somehow, it's the minority.
Yeah.
You want to make sure it's got the judge, it's got the name of a court, it's signed by a judge, it's dated current, the address and the person that they're looking for, that all matches up. They're where they're supposed to be, and just verify that information is accurate.
So taking kind of a step back.
Yeah.
When they come to your house or when they come to an area, a sensitive area, we're going to get into sensitive areas and things like that. What rights is the rights the same for people who are citizens and people who aren't citizens, or does it differ? How does it work in terms of knowing your rights?
So all individuals living in the United States have constitutional rights. Doesn't matter if you're a citizen, not citizen, here as a documented immigrant or lawful immigrant or an undocumented or unlawful immigrant, you have rights. And the basic rights in these encounters are every person has a right to remain silent. Every person has a right to consult an attorney. Now, the difference between, for example, criminal law and immigration law is in immigration law, you have a right to an attorney, but it's at no expense to the government. Now, we'll talk about that, which means the government doesn't provide you a lawyer.
Yeah.
Now, we could talk about that later. There's a lot of organizations that will offer free or low-cost services. So you also have the right not to sign any documents without an attorney. You have a right not to answer any questions. And there's a lot of resources out there that you can find online even, or we can share with the podcast online. They're Know Your Rights cards. So if you're encountered, you don't even have to say anything. You can just hand them the Know Your Rights card, and it'll say, I have rights. I have a right to speak to an attorney. I have a right to remain silent. I have a right not to answer any questions. And that's the best way to do it, because if the government has done their homework, they would have known who they're looking for. They would have, in their database or in their research or in their file, a picture of the person. They would have pulled a warrant, the proper warrant, and then they can make the arrest. But more importantly, these rights, who are they really, really going to protect? The collaterals. If they're coming looking for me, they know how I look. They probably know how I talk. They're going to be able to find me and arrest me. But if they have no idea who you are and you're with me, if you sit there and you don't say anything, how are they going to arrest you? What cause do they have to arrest you? The only way they're going to have cause is when you start talking. If you don't say anything and you sit there, there's nothing they can do. And I'll just add this last, things you never do in addition to, never try to obstruct or harm an officer. Don't run. Stay calm. There's an instinct, I think, to panic and try to run. If they didn't come looking for you, they have no idea who you are, and you don't run and you remain silent, you exercise your rights, they can't arrest you, because if they arrest you and you turn out to be a citizen, that's grounds for a lawsuit, and there have been several successful lawsuits in the millions of dollars for wrongful arrests. So, and then also, if you do run under the Immigration and Nationality Act, that if you run away from an immigration officer, that gives them grounds to suspect that you're here in violation of law, immigration law, and then they can arrest you to figure out who you are.
Okay. So they can arrest you, so when because I'm just thinking of like when there's probable causes for arrest in different scenarios. So let's say if somebody runs, because you see a lot of videos of kids running, younger people they run. They just run when whenever there's some sort of interaction or something with the law. If those kids are arrested, what happens after that? Are they arrested and jailed, or are they arrested and ID'd? How does it work? And how are they able to, regardless, you shouldn't run, but I just want to clarify, is that something that, are you breaking the law by running?
So yeah, you shouldn't flee an officer. That is fleeing an officer is technically a crime.
Okay.
But what usually will happen is when they take you in, they'll take you to what's called a service processing center. They'll fingerprint you, and they'll do intake paperwork to kind of figure out your identity, and to figure out how to charge you or if to charge you. Okay. It's going to depend on the case. And when I say charge, I mean an immigration violation. Because remember, ICE cannot arrest you if you're a citizen. Like, they have no jurisdiction to arrest you. And this actually reminds me. I'll stick with this just to finish this answer. They'll process you, and if you are here as an immigrant and you're not here lawfully, you're in violation of law, they're going to issue you. Typically, they'll issue you a charging document called a notice to appear in immigration court. It's basically like a complaint. It says, okay, your name is so and so. You're not a citizen or national of the United States. You're a native and citizen of this country. You came here on this date without status, and you're here in violation of immigration law. You go and see a judge, and then you have an immigration hearing. Sometimes they would have already had their immigration hearing, and they have a removal order. They've already been ordered deported by a judge or by ICE. And then they get caught. In those situations, they'll process them straight for a deportation. Now, it'll still take a few weeks, depending on the country. Sometimes it could take several months, because they have to work with the home country's embassy, consulates, to get a travel document or passport, and for them to accept the country to accept the person. So that could take a little time to arrange for the deportation. But I do remember you asked earlier, and I didn't answer it fully. So ICE. So let's say, to the house example.
Yeah.
The police can ICE work with local
law enforcement? Yeah.
Local law enforcement. So the answer to that is it depends. The lawyer answer. So it depends on the jurisdiction, the state that you're in. So in Illinois, we live in what's called a sanctuary jurisdiction, similar to New York or California. In these jurisdictions, state and local authorities are prohibited. It's against the law for them to work with immigration authorities on immigration issues. Now, so they can't. Yeah, so it's even unlawful under the Illinois Trust Act and then the Way Forward Act. It's unlawful for, the sheriff or the state police or Chicago Police Department to share information about a criminal they know is here in violation of immigration law with ICE. They can't do it. In other jurisdictions, think Texas or Missouri, more conservative jurisdictions, they do, and they often do partner up together, and they go out and make these arrests. Sometimes the ICE can deputize local authorities, and then they'll work together to make arrests. And they can be a combination of criminal and immigration arrests. So I think to our community in this administration, it's also very, I think, an important reminder, things to be careful of is if you're in a different state and you get pulled over by a police officer, or you get somehow into their criminal system, if you're here in violation of law and you're in a conservative, non-sanctuary state, you could be turned over to ICE. So if you're driving over to Indiana, or you're driving over to Missouri or Kansas, those are going to be states where they do cooperate. Illinois, bigger cities, typically, you're not going to have that. You're not going to have that risk, okay, or at least not as high of a risk.
Okay. Yeah. There was a video that I saw not too long ago with ICE working with, or what it looked to be ICE working with the DEA. Are they able to work together in sanctuary states, or is it the same type of prohibition?
So great question. So the DEA is a federal agency.
Okay. So
absolutely they can. And in fact, ICE often works with the FBI. They'll work with the DEA. Sometimes they'll work with ATF. They'll all the time they're working with different agents. They'll work with the IRS, and it just depends on the case. And I think we can expect more of that in this administration, even though they've always done it. I don't want to make it sound like this is another huge change. It's pretty normal. So if it's, for example, if it's a serious criminal or a terrorist case, ICE will partner up with the FBI. They have this group called the Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF. They'll work together and they'll arrest the individual and they'll try to get a criminal conviction for providing support to terrorism and a deportation order, all kind of together. Now, what we can expect in this administration is, you hear, they're shutting down the USAID or the Department of Education. Well, a lot of those workers, the federal workers, are going to be reassigned if they're not fired or they're not, they don't take the government buyouts that they're offering. They're going to be reassigned. It's possible that they are reassigned to do immigration things. So in that sense, they'll be wearing the DHS, the ICE hat. You won't know that they're from Department of Education. But there'll be more resources poured into it. But absolutely, to answer the question, there's no prohibition whatsoever from ICE working with other federal agencies to enforce federal immigration law.
You mentioned something that is kind of veering a little bit off a topic, specifically in regards to what we're talking about with federal agencies. But you mentioned the Joint Task Force. What was it again?
The Joint Terrorism Task Force.
Joint Terrorism Task Force. Now, speaking about task force in general, recently there's been a task force created called the October 7th Task Force that is looking at people who are suspected of terroristic acts or support of terrorism, whatever the case is, and they're targeting a lot of students who took part in protests, encampments, etc., to look into them to see if they violated any sort of policies that may cause them to be deported. So my question is, what are the boundaries around deporting students that are here on visas, on student visas and things like that?
Yeah, this is, I think this is an issue that should be taken very seriously. Now, I will say this, task forces, the government, they love task forces. So there's, all sorts of task forces, that's just usually what that means is it's two different groupings two or more groupings of law enforcement agencies or teams that will work together as part of a task force to accomplish a common goal. The FBI, their goal is prosecuting criminals and including terrorism. Immigration, their goal is to remove individuals here in violation of the law, immigration law, including terrorism. So there's a common interest. So they partner up and they pursue these cases. As for the October 7 task force and student visitors, student visas, they're F1 student visitors. Look, one of the ways that they can terminate your student visa is if you're here, if you violated the visa, you violated the conditions of your visa. So under immigration law, if you have, and I'm quoting from the law, if you have engaged in terrorism or you have provided material support to terrorism, and these are rarely used provisions in the Immigration Nationality Act because they're very controversial. But the law says if you have endorsed or espoused terrorist activity or you have incited terrorist activity. In my 12 years of experience, I don't think we ever use these grounds. And I work this portion of the law regularly on a daily basis. Very controversial because it raises First Amendment. Like, is it free speech or am I really trying to promote or espouse terrorism? But I think in this administration, this is another big change, is I don't think they're really going to care about the First Amendment when it comes to this issue. I think they're going to try to silence voices. And the law says endorse or espousing terrorism is a ground for inadmissibility, which would be a ground for terminating your student visa. endorsing or espousing or inciting. So they could use either of those. So I think for the students, I love the passion, and I think that they just have to be very mindful. You know you got to be careful what you're liking on social media, and just really think about what you're sharing, what videos you're sharing, what messages you're posting, what you're liking, because the government, this task force is designed to look at exactly these issues, and they're looking for a reason to say you violated the conditions of your student visa, and they can terminate it. Now you would probably if they terminated your student visa, you'd be issued a notice to appear, and you'd go to immigration court, and you can fight it in immigration court. And there you'll be able to raise First Amendment issues, and you'll be able to contest it. But in the meantime, you won't have any status, and you could be kicked out of school, without a student visa. So I would just say be very, very careful and thoughtful before you're posting things. Obviously, again, this is not for U.S. citizens. This is for people on visas who these authorities would apply to.
So you said it's not for U.S. citizens. What are there any policies that affect U.S. citizens when it comes to immigration?
So I mean, the most prominent criminal statute federal is 18 USC 2339, and that's providing material support to terrorism. That's going to be the one that the charge they'll typically bring in federal court. I don't know how a U.S. attorney in good conscience, even in this administration, could charge someone with providing support to terrorism based on a post or a video. If there's nothing else there, I'm assuming that's the worst thing the person did, right?
Yeah.
Because I think there's going to be First Amendment issues galore. So I think the risk to U.S. citizens is a lot lower if all they're doing is speech.
Yeah.
Right. Obviously, if you're doing something else, then perhaps you should be prosecuted.
Right.
Because it is a violation of law to support groups that the United States has designated as a terrorist organization, regardless of your political beliefs. That's the law of the land and the country that we live in. But so I think the risk for citizens is lower because they have to show that you gave support to them, something material.
Yeah.
Can't just be, I spoke something and that's protected free speech. But for students who are on visas, F1 student visas, they are subject to the provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act. And in the Immigration and Nationality Act, it says if you endorse or espouse terrorism or you incite terrorist activity, those are grounds. Now, we can challenge that in court and say First Amendment, but those are grounds for the government to terminate the status. And that's what they're going to be looking at. They're going to be looking at those provisions, and they're going to be looking at what's being posted on social media, what's being said, what's being chanted at rallies, and they're going to try to use it against those students.
So I guess taking a step back, but also focusing on schools, students in schools. We talked a little bit about sensitive areas. Schools, religious institutions. I don't know if there's any other sensitive areas besides those two that I'm.
Hospitals.
Hospitals.
Yeah, a home would not be technically a sensitive area. It's protected under the Fourth Amendment. It's definitely you have your strongest protection of the Fourth Amendment. But yes, I didn't mean to cut you off. Schools, courthouses, hospitals. Yeah.
Okay, courthouses as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Typically.
So, in those sensitive areas, if there are, I don't want to use the word raids, but let's say if there is somebody at those sensitive locations that ICE is a person of interest for ICE, what are the best ways that those sensitive locations, regardless of the people that are in the locations, because a lot of them are, let's say, for example, mosques that people come for congregation, and let's say if there's somebody in the crowd that is wanted by ICE and the ICE agents come into that location, what happens then? Is ICE allowed to just go into that location and find and grab that person, take them out? Is like, do you stop them? Like, can you just give a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say, let's just take a step back. So the sensitive locations policy is every administration can define it however they want. So in the previous administration, the policy generally was, we view courthouses, hospitals, schools, religious institutions as sensitive locations where we want to avoid going there, typically. But there's nothing in the law that prevents them from going there. The federal authorities, they have the jurisdiction and the authority to go and make arrests anywhere. What President Trump did very early is rescind that whole sensitive locations policy. He basically said, I am not going to have a policy that restricts where immigration laws can be enforced. They can be enforced anywhere. That said, that doesn't mean they're going to go out and, start raiding masajid or going into hospitals and schools. It just means they're not going to restrict themselves. And they'll say, and I think this is fair, they'll say the FBI doesn't have that restriction, the DEA doesn't have that restriction, no other law enforcement agency, federal, has that restriction, so why should we? They'll say, we're a professional law enforcement agency, and we're going to do things that are safe and that do not put our officers in danger or the public in danger. And I actually, I take that. I think there's definitely truth to that. I don't think that's the ICE is not going to want to put their officers and their agents in danger. They're not going to want to go on Jummah or Taraweeh where the masjid is packed and they're going to, be surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands of people praying. Yeah. It's just not a safe thing to do. And it's not something that I suspect supervisory officers and especially attorneys in the government are gonna sign off on. Yeah. So even when they had those sensitive policies in the past, even in the previous administration, when we've had to look at those, the question would always be: is there another way? Yeah. Is there a way to not go into the masjid to arrest this individual we really want? And usually there is. Wait till the person leaves. Wait till they get home. See if you can pull them over. You make the arrest on the street or at their house, not in an area where it's super sensitive. It's usually they're not going to go into that unless there aren't that many other alternative safe ways to do it. Mm. Go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned something that I want to kind of take a look at. You said that you said that they won't get signed off on. So is there a process that happens within the government where it's certain things have to be looked at, approved, and then something executed?
Yes. So when they had the sensitive locations policy that restricted ICE's ability to go into these areas, it was a process that they had to elevate all the way up, to basically a senior level and consult with an attorney. Now, even in President Trump's new policy, well, basically where he rescinded it, I think his new policy is called common sense, is what he calls it, which, I understand, it's common sense, it's you're gonna do something that it's gonna be a last resort. Even in his common sense policy, their supervisory approval is required. Mm-hmm. So it can't just be some random, first line officer who's like, I'm going in to go get the guy. That person has to go elevated and obtain supervisory approval 2 layers up. Has to go to an AFOD or an ASAC. So an assistant field office director or an assistant special agent in charge. So that's essentially 2 layers before what they would call the directory level, like the most senior person in the jurisdiction. Mm. So, and they all know, they're very conscious of bad press. They don't want the bad press. They want good press. And they want people to trust them. They want the public to trust them. So I would be surprised. I would really be surprised. Can't say shocked with the current administration and all the rhetoric, but I would be surprised if they start going into these areas, especially during Ramadan or Jum'ah or Taraweeh.
Yeah.
I would be really shocked if something like that happens.
Yeah, because our community wants to know what they can do to stay safe, because you don't know who's coming into your masjid. You don't know who's coming. You don't know, you just assume the best of everybody. So how can our communities, specifically the masajid, stay safe? What can they do beforehand to, what policies can they have in place? What signage or what can they have in place?
So this is a great question, and I've been going around giving know your rights trainings to mosques, to businesses, and there's a lot of overlap. But I think for masajid, I think the number one for any entity really, the number one thing you should do is designate one person or two people, maybe a backup, to be the point of contact if there's an encounter with ICE, to talk to them. Last thing you want is to have 7 or 10 or 20 people all trying to talk to ICE and volunteer information. We shouldn't be helping ICE do their job. They're professionals. They're going out looking for the person. So designate one person to be the representative to communicate with ICE. Train that person to ask when you see them, can I see your warrant? Who is it that you're looking for? Is it a judicial warrant? Is it an administrative warrant? Because that's going to tell you whether they can go into private areas of the masjid without your consent, if they have a judicial warrant. Mm-hmm. The next thing you can do is, and I know masajid are, in general, they're very open to the public.
Yeah.
But you can designate areas as private in the mosque. So offices, you can say employees only, or not, or, restricted, not open to the public. So signage, locking doors, so that it's clearly marked, or clearly, it's clear to everyone what area is public and what area is private. So I would recommend taking those steps. That applies for a business as well. Because ICE or any law enforcement, they can go into a public area. If it's open to the public, they have just the same right as everyone else. They walk into a restaurant, they could sit in the dining area and eat just like everyone else. But they can't go into the private areas without your consent or a judicial warrant. Mm-hmm. So mark it, designate a representative. That representative should ask for an attorney. And, for a masjid, the other thing you can do is you could consider putting up signage that says, the members only. The mosque is not open to anyone in the public. It's members only. Whether you enforce that or not, but you could put up signage there. During salah, you could lock the door if that's possible. MashaAllah, alhamdulillah, we have big communities. It might not be possible. But if it is possible, you can lock the door. And then they're gonna need authority to enter. They can't just break the door without violating your rights. Of course, if they did break the door, don't try to stop them. Record them, take notes, and document it. You can fight it. But those are the steps. So put up signage, designate a POC. Don't have a million people helping them out. And I think those are things you can do. So,
speaking on the part where you said businesses, you specified businesses. Now, our community has a lot of small businesses, right? A lot of small business owners who hire immigrants. What policies should those business owners be aware of to protect their employees?
So, why would ICE come to a business, right? So ICE can come to the business if they're looking for someone in particular, someone who's a criminal or someone who's for some reason is on their radar. They could come to the business if they suspect that the business is hiring a bunch of people that do not have status, so they can come and raid the business. Or they can come to the business to do, and this is very important, and a lot of people in our community don't know this, to conduct what's called an I-9 verification audit. It's kind of like a tax audit. They come and so for every business, every single employee, U.S. citizen, not U.S. citizen, every single employee that a business hires has to complete a Form I-9 identity and employment verification document. which verifies the identity of the person you're hiring and their authorization to work in the United States. If you don't fill those out and they do an audit, the fines are pretty hefty. For example, they can range between around $200 and I don't have the exact numbers, like $280 to $3,300, I believe is the number. It changes every year. It goes up. For even if you filled out the form, if you didn't fill it out correctly, paperwork violations. But it's even higher. It goes from like 600 to around 5,500 if they find that you've hired someone that is not allowed to work here, is not here lawfully. And that's for each violation, for each paperwork violation, for each individual you hire. So a few years ago, there was a company that got fined, a staffing company. They got fined millions of dollars. It was one of the largest fines in the history of I-9 enforcement. Definitely, you can expect an increase in I-9 audits. And so employers, I would say, make sure when you hire every single person, U.S. citizen or not, they have to fill out an I-9. Put up signage, again, in your workplace, similar to what we discussed in the masjid. Put up signage that says, this area is private, this is employees only, this area is public. Never consent to letting them go into the private areas. Have a person designated to speak to ICE, not multiple people. Train your staff about know their rights. They don't have to answer any questions. They can remain silent. They can speak to an attorney. Also, they shouldn't sign anything without an attorney. Also, I think another good thing to do is if you do have someone that you think is vulnerable, that is here, that doesn't have status, make sure you have the contact information for their loved ones or for their friends or family. Because if they are taken away, you want to be able to inform the family so that they can communicate with them and arrange for counsel to help them out. So those are the steps. Practice. You can do just like you do a fire drill. You can do an immigration drill. You want people to stay calm, not run. See if representative goes, ask for a warrant. You can also do I-9 audits. Or go to an I-9. Contact an attorney who could teach you how to fill out these I-9s. Make sure, because you have to keep them on file, what to look out for. Those are the proactive steps you can take as a business to be prepared if there is an ICE encounter.
So we talked about ICE encounters in businesses. We talked about sensitive areas. We talked about students. We talked about students. Now, what I want to get into is it's not just because we talked about students, but we talked about mainly students in universities. What about young children that are, that are here illegally with their parents or whatever the case is in elementary schools or junior high schools? What are some pointers, or what are some, I guess, for those people, what do you have for them to kind of,
Yeah, I think, fortunately the schools, and I think the schools have to be prepared, and I think a lot of them are trying to be, but it's kind of the same thing, lock doors, to protect the students, and they do, especially with, unfortunately, school shootings.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be very rare that ICE is going to go to a school to arrest a child. That said, I've heard that there have been, these situations have happened, and usually what they'll be a teenager in high school who maybe they suspect is affiliated with gangs. They may try to go and arrest the person. I don't know. I think that really it's on the school to put in place policies and procedures similar to what we talked about for work and at the mosque, to protect the school, to not give them consent to enter, to ask to see a warrant, to label areas private, to lock doors. That's what they can do. As for the child, unfortunately, they're gonna, they should know their rights. Know to remain silent, know not to answer questions. But I can tell you, since the school is a sensitive location, if the government is going into a school, that means they should have done their research. They know exactly who they're looking for. They're going into a sensitive area. So I would still believe that these are going to be few and far between encounters, very rare.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to spread, fear or panic in the community. I think, there are a lot of, I think there's a lot of that, and I don't know that that's healthy necessarily. I know we need to be vigilant. We need to be aware. We need to be careful. And the concern is real, and we should be concerned. But I don't know that, all of our, we should focus a significant amount of energy on that, because I think it's going to be very rare that they're going to go into a school.
Yeah.
I really do.
Would you say that there's a lot of propaganda, a lot of like misinformation out there?
There's a ton of misinformation. I mean, the thing I hear all the time is they're going to set up checkpoints.
Yeah.
There's going to be a checkpoint at the Walmart, or on this random street. And I think a lot of that is false or misleading, because they can't just ask random people without any probable cause. Whether they're here legally, they just can't do that. You can't just stop you, just like they stop you for a seatbelt check.
Yeah.
Now, what there are, and I think where this misinformation comes from is these collateral arrests. They'll go and they'll find maybe the person they're looking for in the parking lot of Walmart, and then they'll start questioning others around them, and then it looks like they're conducting a traffic stop or a checkpoint or something. And I think the mistake is people are, unfortunately, they don't know their rights. They don't know that they don't have to answer these questions, that they can remain silent. As soon as they ask you where were you born, and you say somewhere not the United States, now you have to show that you're here lawfully. But if you just don't say anything, you're safe. The other area where there's misinformation is, and I've experienced this, and this shocked me, when I first joined the government and I was sent to El Paso, there are similar to if you there's like checkpoints. I wouldn't call them checkpoints, but they're checkpoints near the border. Almost like if you pay attention on the highway, like the rest areas, or where they weigh, like they do those truck weigh stations.
Yeah.
They have them set up there. Customs and Border Protection have them set, but that's because they're near the border. That's near Mexico and near Canada. They'll have those checkpoints near the border, but that's everybody has to stop. You pull over. They'll ask you some questions. You keep going. But in terms of in the inner part of the country, I haven't seen those.
Okay. Yeah, because obviously, on social media, you see a lot of videos with no context, and a lot of people are like you said, checkpoint. There's a checkpoint here, or they're doing a raid over here. Or they're doing this over here. So it's good to have a good understanding on what exactly that is. I think one thing that I want to talk about that we talked about briefly, but we didn't get fully into, is the naturalization versus denaturalization. You hear these words a lot. Can you explain to our viewers what are the differences between the two, and can someone, a citizen someone who's naturalized, become denaturalized? Like, what is the
Yeah. So basically, if you're born in the United States, you're a citizen based on your birth. For individuals who are not born in the United States and who do not derive or acquire citizenship automatically through a parent, because you can not be born here and still be a citizen at birth if you have a parent or two parents who are citizens. Removing those categories of individuals, a naturalized citizen is someone who comes here, gains lawful immigration status as a permanent resident, and then eventually transitions from permanent resident, so green card holder, to citizen. You go through a process called naturalization. Typically, you have to be a green card holder for 5 years before you can apply to naturalize. The only exception to that is if you gained your green card through a spouse, a U.S. citizen spouse, then you only have to wait 3 years. So it's a 5-year wait period after you get your green card. You become a permanent resident. You have to wait 5 years. Unless it's marriage to a U.S. citizen, then it's only 3 years. And then you can apply to naturalize. To naturalize, to be eligible. So you have to have been a lawful permanent resident. So you got your status lawfully, either the 5-year or the 3-year period. And then you have to have good moral character is what it's called. Good moral, and it's quotations, meaning you pay your taxes, you haven't committed any crimes from the time that you submit your application through the time, from the time dating back to your 5-year period through the time you take the oath. So it's the 5 years, and then it stretches all the way to when you take the oath of allegiance, and that's the last requirement. So you take an oath of allegiance, swearing allegiance to the Constitution. You'll support and defend the Constitution of the United States. And I should also add, you have to take a civics test and an English language test when you do your interview for naturalization. But those are broadly the requirements. If you meet those requirements and you take the oath, you're issued a certificate of naturalization. It's kind of like a diploma. It's a big ceremony, and it's almost like a graduation ceremony when you go do your naturalization. And it's administered by a judge, and you get to naturalize. Then you can apply for a passport. Once you're a naturalized citizen, you're the same as every other citizen. There's no two classes of citizens. Although this administration tried to create that, I could tell you that in a moment. But every citizen's created equally. Now, and I should say that there's another way to naturalize if you serve in the military.
Yeah.
And that would allow you to go from no status to a fast track to naturalization. But in the end, you're still taking the oath of allegiance, you're getting a certificate of naturalization, and you're a naturalized citizen. So what is denaturalization? Denaturalization is the process of taking away, stripping the naturalized citizen of their citizenship. Again, this does not apply to people who were born here. This does not apply to if you acquired or you derived it lawfully through a parent. I'm not talking about those categories removed. Only talking about people who have gone through the naturalization process. They can be denaturalized if there was something wrong in their process of getting naturalization. So, if they committed fraud or material misrepresentation, they lied somehow in their naturalization process, they can lose their citizenship. They can also lose their citizenship if they lied to get their green card, even before the naturalization process, if they lied. Because the first requirement is to be a lawful permanent resident. Well, you might be a permanent resident, but you may not have obtained it lawfully.
Right.
So really, it will cover any kind of fraud or material misrepresentation from your entire immigration history, basically. From when you went and did the interview at the consulate to get the visa, to the green card, to all the steps in between up until naturalization, it will cover. If there's any problem in that chain, they can try to denaturalize you on that. So who do they denaturalize realistically? Historically, they would do maybe 30 to 40 denaturalization cases a year, which is a low number given the population of of citizens in the United States. And they would usually only be the worst of the worst kinds of cases. So, for example, I can tell you I've worked on some cases, denaturalization cases. Sex offenders. A lot of times sex crimes are committed and the arrest and the prosecution doesn't happen until years later.
Yeah.
So one of the questions on the naturalization application is, have you ever committed a crime for which you have not yet been arrested, for which you have not been arrested for? Mm-hmm. Sex offender is going to say, no, I haven't. Who would say yes, right, if they have never been arrested? And then they naturalize. And then 3, 4, 10 years after they naturalize, the allegations come out, they're charged, and they're convicted in criminal court for a sex offense that started before they naturalized. So now the government can say there's fraud in the naturalization process because you were asked, did you commit a crime? And you said no. You knew you were committing a sex offense. You said no. Even though your conviction happened afterwards, the conduct occurred before and you didn't disclose it. So that's fraud. So that's a basis to denaturalize someone.
Yeah, so I think we pretty pretty much covered all the topics. Very very informational episode for a time that it's well needed. Um, so if for resources, where can people go to find you, and can you give some resources?
Yeah, I'm online. I'm at a firm called Kelly Dry and Warren. My name is Alla Taher, Allathaher, and I believe we'll put my information on the website as well. I practice immigration law. I practice white collar crime and corporate compliance. Also, there are lots of nonprofit or low bono, cheaper legal services. Look in the area that you're in. If you're encountered by ICE, they're supposed to give you a pro bono list. In the Chicagoland area, there's some reputable organizations, Catholic Charities, CARE, Chicago. Also, there's the National Immigrant Justice Center, Coalition on Refugee Rights. So there's a lot of organizations, and you can even reach out to the immigration court, and they'll be able to give you information. You can Google it, and there should be information that'll come up as well that will offer lower free legal services.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, Alat, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Ibrahim. It was an honor to be here, and really enjoyed the conversation.